All right, good afternoon. Can you all hear me? All right. Welcome to the Lazadra Museum. My name is Sarah, and I am the educator here. And I hope you can all welcome our speaker today, one of the artists for our special exhibit, Stone Carvers of Earth and Imagination, Ted Strandt.
Thank you.
Started in the monument business and took his first sculpture lesson when he was 30 years old. After his presentation today, please join us for an artist reception to celebrate both his work and Walter Arnold, who presented here in July. His work is also on display in our special exhibit hall. If you have not seen either of those two artists' work, you need to make your way back there today and see it. They're fabulous. So please, let's welcome Ted Strandt.
Well, first, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. First, I want to say thank you to Dorothy and the staff for this opportunity. I want to say thank you to my sister-in-law for setting this up for me, my wife with all her patience, my mom, and Walter Arnold, who's not here right now, but joining me in this show. So, I see many familiar faces out here. Those that don't know me, my name's Ted Strandt, and I was born to carve stone. This is what we're going to go through: my history, modern day, education, my monument shop, my sculpture lesson, a trip to Denmark, part where we ask the questions the most, the dwarfs and the things, and then we'll take time out for a question and answers part, and then I hope to have time for one more story. So we got 250 years and quite a few thousand miles to go through here. Back in around the year 1770, my 3 times great-grandfather, which in Danish is my tip-oldefar, was born in this part of Germany in a town called Bad Adelslo. And in the family book, his trade was listed as a stenhugger, which translates to a stone carver, stone cutter. And around 1770, he traveled up to this area here on the island of Fune to work on the, he was born in 1770. Around 1796, he traveled up to the island of Fune to work on the Odense Canal, which was being built at that time. And that was built from 1796 to around 1804, at which time he met and married a girl named Maren Rasmus's daughter. They had 7 children. One of those children was Hans Johansson, because they take the last, my 3 times great-grandfather's name was Johann Moller. So when they had the children, then that last name becomes the father's first name. So they became Hans Johansson. Hans Johansson married a girl named Anna Kirsten Jensdatter, and then they had 8 children. And that would be my tip-oldefar. And one of those children was Christian Hansen. And he's my oldefar, my great-grandfather. In the family book, I said the trade was listed as a stenhugger. There we are. The Odense Canal, which was built, and that's on the island of Fune that I showed you up there. Put a face to my great-grandfather, Christian Hansen. This is the ancestral farm. Now, this wasn't the property that they got right away. This building was built in 1910, and that's engraved on one of the foundation blocks, stone. So that's when I knew when that was built. But in 1808 is when the property was purchased. Whoop. Christian Hansen had a daughter. Well, Christian Jansen actually had 15 kids, 10 of which survived. And of those 15 kids, there was a set of twins in there. One twin died, the other one survived, and that was my grandmother, Johanna Hansen. She came to the United States in 1921, and moved to Elmwood Park, married my what I will say here is I struggled how to describe my grandma Woody, but I'll say this. She was a woman before her time and tough as nails. You know, that's pretty much how I would describe her. She had 5 children, 2 of them with her second husband, Ed Woody, and one of those children is my mom. And one of the things that my grandma brought over from Denmark was the stone carver's gene from my ancestors and a creative spirit. She took dressmaking in Denmark and had her own business over here, a dress shop, I believe it was in River Forest. I heard she also taught at the Art Institute, so she was quite a creative person. And then my mom, who's also pretty creative, she sews, paints, and certainly an influence on me. I grew up through the Elmwood Park public school system. I was a kid that always liked to draw when I was small, so I mean, certainly my art teacher, Gora, Mr. Rand. In high school, there was Miss Wheeler and Miss Malapi, and I'm sure they all had an influence on me. I also took a little cooking in high school. One of the things I do remember in one of the teachers in high school had somebody who graduated, and went on to take commercial art in college and came back to have a talk with us. But I think my main takeaway from that talk was homework and deadlines. So I knew I did not want to take commercial art in college. I was trying to avoid these things. So that's pretty much my education there. In 1979, I'm going to tell you how this all led up. After high school, I did do a stint over at Triton, but I don't even think I finished the semester there. And then I was working in factories, basically. And in one of the factories, I met a friend who was doing tattoos. And we're talking about 1977 here. So he was working in art after his factory job, and it kind of opened my eyes that there are ways to make money in art that didn't really require college. So he's still a friend of mine today. Another thing is I grabbed the local paper at the time in Elmwood Park. Before that, let me take a step before that. I was looking through a magazine, and I saw metal engraving done on gun stock, and I thought this was really pretty cool too. You know, there's another job that probably with the right tools and a knack and know-how and a creative spirit, you could do it. So here was another job that I saw that probably didn't require a college education. So at some point I was going through the neighborhood paper and I saw a job for a metal engraver, and I was like, whoa, you know, got up and called that number, and the job was taken. So immediately after I heard that, I was walking back and gravestones came to my mind. So I grabbed the yellow pages, the neighborhood yellow pages for that, and I found a place in Forest Park. I went in and talked to the guy, and he asked me if I took art in high school. I said I did. And he said, when could you start? I said, Monday. He asked me if I had a job. I said I did. He goes, well, give the company 2 weeks' notice and then come in. So after 2 weeks, I walked into the shop at 8 o'clock in the morning like a sea turtle returning to the beach from which it was born. Here I am working in stone. So it's here that I learned the trade. I started out by cutting stencil and washing stones, but the way this is all done is you have a layout guy, a stencil cutter, and sandblasting. 99% of it's done by sandblasting, I would say. So 3 big things really kind of happened at this moment. I found a trade. I met this guy, Laverne White. He was the business agent who was for the union, and he would collect dues. He would always show up right around lunchtime where I worked because we would play cards for that half hour or so, scarf down our sandwiches, and then play cards. The other thing I learned is we did work for pet cemeteries. And I never even knew there were pet cemeteries at this time, but it was an eye-opener for me. And in a way, it was an artistic outlet for me, because now I found something that I seen I could do for a pretty long time. One of the things I didn't realize when I started at this job is these guys were all in their 60s and actually a few years from retirement. So after a few years of working there, they retired. They kept this other guy, Joey LaBello, and then I had to go out and find another place. But Laverne took care of me. He got me another job in another shop. And I worked at a couple of shops between this period, learning the different aspects of it. When I talk about stencil, there's a first cut and there's a second cut. So the first cut, you're pulling the panel, and what you leave stencil on is going to stay polished. Where you take the stencil off, we're frosting the panels on there. And then there's a second cut then where you put the stencil back in, you cut out the letters, cut out the design, and when the sand hits the stone, it digs in. When it hits the rubber, it bounces back. So this is pretty much where I learned, I could have a creativity in all of this. We also did work in glass, so people would bring in mirrors, businesses would bring in mirrors or windows, and we would frost that glass. So I wanted to kind of show you a few pet designs and how that went, because the people designs, you had a showroom there, and they were all kind of standard. Once in a while, you'd go off mark. But again, the vast majority of it's the regular designs. Even if you walk through a cemetery, you'll see that. And in '88, I went out on my own. I had an opportunity to buy a guy's equipment and start my own business. So I concentrated on the pet cemeteries. And I got them. I got another pet cemetery called Elm Lawn. There was a place in Joliet whose work I got. So I got quite a few pet cemeteries in the area. Another thing I did a lot of is when the new homes were going up, the limestone address blocks you see that were going in. I did a lot of those. Signs. Sandblasted motorcycle parts for people. Did all sorts of things on my own. This is done with diamond etchings. You get a Dremel and a diamond tip, and I would do pet portraits like that. And I seen that done at another shop that I worked at, so that was kind of an eye-opener too, as far as what could be done on stone. People would bring in cards for me to copy off of. Another mass card there. I'm jumping the gun a little bit because I did this, but I didn't quite get my sculpture lesson yet. So we're going to head into my sculpture lesson now. As I mentioned earlier, I met this guy, Laverne White, who was my business agent, he goes shop to shop. Well, a few months after I started on my own, Laverne came in and asked me if I'd be interested in renting out a corner of my shop to this guy, Bob Good, to have these 2 busts carved for the entrance of a potato farm up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I said I would. So I'm going to put a face to these people. This is Laverne here on the left. That's Bob Good, who taught me to carve. And that's Reinhold on the right there. And Reinhold came in because he was doing a lot of the roughing in on this job. Bob was the sculptor, and there's Whitey. He treated me like his 4th son. I really, really liked Whitey. So that red cloth up there, when first we got the blocks of granite, and Reinhold came and he brought a bridge saw, which sits on, say, a horse here and a horse there, and there's a track that goes across, and it's a pretty good sized stone. So Bob came in with his drawings, this half-size model with the instructions that this rag can't dry out. It was wet, you know, and that box came a little bit later, but we got that there. But this is what Bob put on the stone when the blocks came in. He cut out a silhouette of the 2 sculptures that he was going to do and spray painted on there. So when the bridge saw was going across, it was going right up to the lines where there was paint, but what was inside there, and I'll show you pictures later when we get to the dwarfs, how that looked. So it's basically the maximum outside right here. This is the woman, that's the man, in the front and the back. So he sawed all 4 sides, and then you knock the fins off, and you got pretty much your highest points on there. So Bob, you know, he came in and that couldn't dry out. And then he started messing with this box that you see here. And I didn't really understand what he was talking about when it got to this part, because he was trying to make some sort of point machine where you point, and that was at a certain scale, and he was going to double it or whatever the difference was. And he's explaining it to me, and yet he's homemade, you know, kind of coming up with this homemade kit. And Laverne would stop in and want to know how progress was going, and he would say, I wish you'd quit messing around with that box and get going. And one day I was standing out in the driveway, and I saw that box come flying out, the garage door, tumbling across the drive. Oh, what's going on now? So I went in there and talked to him, see what was going on. And Bob said these words, which told me, now I'm going to learn how to carve stone. He goes, I'm just going to have to wing it. And from there on out, I knew, okay, I'm going to understand what's going on. So Reinhold would come in, and he would start taking all of this down and smoothing it out. And then Bob would come in and start drawing it on, and it would be going. And there was a place up the street called Chet's Melody Bar and Grill. And Bob would like to take a lunch once in a while, and he'd ask me, do you want to work on this for a while? And I would say, yeah. And he'd tell me what he'd want me to do, drill holes here and saw there, and take the one tool and start rounding it all out. So I was helping on the roughing in on all of this. And that's pretty much how I saw that this sculpture stuff goes. These are the 2 completed sculptures. That's the potato farm up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan there. We'll get to questions, but...
The way they were stacked up, does he glue them?
No, that was just one block. That was just one block.
And it had edges, okay, I thought it was individual.
So now comes a trip to Denmark. And we did this in 2005. This is King Gorm's, the old rune stone, and it's probably about 1,000 years old. So on this trip, me, my mom, my sister Sherry, and my mom's sister, my Auntie Ethel, went there. And a lot happened here. First of all, they had a huge meal where of the 10 survivors, we met their kids or whatever, all my mom's like first cousins were all at this meal. Another thing was we visited the ancestral farm, which was the building I showed you there, and my cousin Charlotta took me to the tool shed and I found an old stonecutter's chisel. I got my hands on that. She said I could have that. We also went up to Aarhus, which is an old Viking trading port on the peninsula of Denmark. And then on the way back, we went and seen the Yelling Stones. But when we were up in Aarhus, there's this store called Kopi Smukker, and they would do replica work of jewelry and pendants and stuff that they'd find at Viking burial sites. And I bought the Viking key to heaven over there and a chain. And the theory here was the Vikings would wear this because, and they'd wear that along with a Thor's hammer, but the Viking key is if they did run into a disaster and got killed, their theory was they could use this key and unlock the gates of heaven and let themselves in, So that's how that went. But I took my key, which I have on right here, and I supercharged it on this stone because it was uncovered at the moment. Now it's all encased, but at this time you could run your hands on it, and I put it up there and supercharged it. And I think it might have been at this moment that the seeds of the dwarfs might have been planted in me. Another little thing about this town of Skellerup, because this is really kind of a sleepy little town. In the last 4 or 5 years, they found a burial, a grave of a vulva, which translates to a seer or a witch. And in that grave, it had all the stuff that pointed to Viking times. It had a wand, jewelry. It was quite a grave that the average farmer or whatever could not have, afford this stuff. And then just like 2 weeks ago, they found a pendant not far from the grave. So I think there was like a lot of magic going on that I couldn't see in this town and the air that I breathed there. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else there, because I was really influenced big time, and all these influences all funneled into the dwarfs down the road. I tasted mead for the first time in Denmark and went on to make my own mead also. I think maybe we can get off of here. So I had all these influences coming in from Denmark. I really can't think any, but if I do, I'll bring them up a little later. Now there's 3 questions I always get asked. Where do I get my stones is one of them. But the main question I get asked is how long does it take to do one? And I don't have a clear-cut answer for any of that. When I had my shop, I had work that I had to get done, selling stones. So I was doing it in between on Saturdays or after work. I would toy around with it. So I never really had a clear-cut answer for it. Same thing in when I brought my stuff. I closed my shop in 2014 and brought my sculpture tools over to the house. This is one of the main reasons I got to thank my wife here is because I got a bunch of stones in my garage and tools and what have you. And anyway, the second most question I get asked is, the first one being how long does it take, is, well, about how long does it take you to do it? And I don't have an answer for that one neither. And the third most common question is, where do I get my stones? Well, I'm going to tell you where I got the stones for the dwarfs and for the things. But I got more stories to more stones even to follow that. So here's some of the tools that I use when I do this. I got a hand set here, which is used to knock off bigger chunks of stone. I have a tracer, which you can use to split stones. They're also used for if you go to the cemeteries and you see like on stones, you'll see those nice corners, that nice white line, the rock pitch going this way, the rock pitch going that way. Those are used for putting those nice corner lines in stones. And you can also split a stone in half using that chisel. This one here is a point. That's used to knock off high areas, so when they're going along and pitching a stone and you got a raised area, they can go in there and hit that high point off. And then I got a chipper right there. And that's for that clean edge that you see when you go into a cemetery where it's, the edges are nice and sharp and crisp and straight. That's what gets used for that job. Oh, I sharpen them. It could be the angle, but they do the job. These are my air hammers. They're very similar to like the guy in the street that's using a jackhammer. These are small held ones. Here we got a flat chisel, most often used for cleaning things up. We got a round, where you got points where you might be scooping it out, or you don't want these sharp edges banging on the sides right there. I got a 4-point ripper, which I love that name. Here's a good tip that Bob gave me. This was I think it was a 1/4-inch flat chisel, but he said you got to grind the edge down so you get an angle like that, and with that you can draw on the stone. So if you put a pencil mark on there, you can go ahead and use that chisel and draw that in. I got a 4-point here, which is a rather aggressive tool that you'd use with something like this or this, where again, if you got like a lump, you can tear that thing down. I got a 9-point chisel, which is where you start cleaning things up. So when we go back to that picture where we had all those lines where Bob, where it was roughed in, this is where Reinhold would be coming in with this and this cup chisel. You'll use this after this to start cleaning it up a little bit more. Grinders, use all of those. I use, in fact, where Bob Reinhold was using the bridge saw, I use this one in the same way, and that one. The drill, I'll explain how I use that later. And here's a pneumatic grinder, and that's got like diamond bits on it. These all have industrial diamonds on them so they can cut into the stone. And here we got files and rasps. And I don't know if you made it to the things yet, but these are what I mainly used when I carved the things. So now we're going to go into a sculpture lesson. Where do I get my stones? What happened one day is I was going through Craigslist looking at the art stuff, and I saw a lift table for sale, and it was in an area where this other sculptor I knew, Adrian, had a studio. I met Adrian one time over at Mino Stone, and I called the number, and sure enough, it was Adrian. So we talked a little bit, and he brought the lift table over to the shop, and I bought it from him. And he said he was moving back to Romania, and one of the things that he wanted to do was build a chisel with an air hole in it, so when you're working, it's going to release air and start cleaning the dust out of the area where you're working. I go, I got one of those. And he goes, let me see it. And I went and got it for him because they're in drill bits. That's not so unusual. But this other one was in like a ripper, and it was brand new. Because when I bought the equipment, I got chisels from there, and some of the old timers gave me their chisels too. So he goes, can I see it? And I went and got it for him. And he's looking at it, and he goes, I'll trade you any block of marble I got for this chisel. I said, let me think about that, because I didn't want to get beaten this deal. So we were talking and stuff, and I said to myself, I got enough chisels to last me 3 lifetimes. So I said, I'll take you up on that deal. So he took the chisel, and I took a ride over to his studio, which was like in a little village right there. And he had a pretty cool place. You opened up the garage, because I had to call him when I got there. I'm out in front. And you open the doors, your car door locked? Yeah, okay, come on in. So went in, and I saw the blocks of marble that he had there, and he had this other stuff. So I picked out a block and brought it back home. I brought it at the shop at this time, because I still had my shop. And I started thinking about these other blocks that he had over there, and I'd like to get my hands on those. So I called him up, and I said, Adrian, I wouldn't mind buying those stones from you. What are you going to do with them? He goes, I want to get rid of them. He goes, I'll give you a super deal. So now we're into around the fall, and I said to my wife and my sister, instead of getting me something for Christmas, why don't you give me some cash so I can go over and buy these stones from Adrian. So I swung a deal, and Adrian loaded up his pickup truck. I put some in mine, and I brought them home. Now, all these stones came from a restoration job, and he made no secret of that. So they all had pinholes. You can see a pinhole here, and on the other side there's a pinhole, and I kind of measured, I stuck something in there, measured it, it's 5 3/4 deep going in there. Measured the size right there maybe. And then this one came up at this angle. So I had to, kind of make a note of all this when I'm doing the dwarfs. So what I do now is I took a piece of paper, a good-sized piece of paper, and I took the measurements of the stone, and that's this line here, this line coming up here, and I drew the dwarf to fit. So, I cut it pretty close, obviously, as you can see, because I don't really like the waist. And from there, I got some Mylar. I took a magic marker, and I traced the outline coming up here, along there, and down there. So I had an outline of the stone. I cut the Mylar out. And then I laid it on the stone, as you can see, and I spray painted. Remove that. There's my figure. So now, what's got to come out is from this point that way. This has to come out, that has to come out, that has to come out. This is all kind of tight here, but that's everything that's got to get removed. So I put it on this side. I also spray painted it on the other side too, but we only need to see one side here. Here I am getting ready. I got this, my hammer, my hand set. That might be my point right there. And I start taking things out, the profile out. And you can see my saw marks here. Now my saw probably didn't reach in all the way, so I had to do it in steps. But here's the size of the chunks that I was taking out up in this area here. And I'll say this, as far as how long something takes, I could say taking off 80% of the stone takes about 20% of my time, and the last 20% of the stone takes about 80% of my time. So we're starting to take shape there, and I take it down as close as I can. as far as this, I didn't touch this with that big saw. I mean, you can see that that's still pretty flat. Let me step back here, it gets a little weird on my eyes. But I got it as close as I could, which is even closer than that because we're pretty much right on it. Now in the back, since it was so close, I used that littler grinder. And you can see I did like a checker pattern there. And I used my hand set just to knock these edges off. And then I came in with my point and popped each of these pieces off. So I'm pretty darn close. We got that going there. And you can see up here where I started using that 9-point ripper to start taking out this here, these marks here, bring it down to a smoother surface. See what picture we got next. So we'll go back to this for a minute. So once I got the profile out, drawing something from the back is a lot easier than drawing something from the front because you just got to do a silhouette rather than all this extra stuff right here. So I'll find my center line. I'll draw my silhouette back here. And then you can see that that kind of looks like where it got sawn. So how that nice and flat that is, you know, over here, along the arms. So I started going in there almost like a butcher on a piece of meat, start breaking it all down. But you want to keep drawing it in there so you don't get lost in there. So I got the profile where I wasn't exactly spot on, but I drew it back in there. So now I got a smaller area head width to start taking that down. I got the front drawn in. So once that profile comes down, this part right here where I got the nose, well, I'll take my little saw and I'll stay on the outside of that line and maybe even go out rather than in because I'm saving some stone on that a little bit, knowing that I didn't go too deep. So now I'm starting to round it out, taking off the sharp edges, using that 9-point. I broke through here now, and that's where the drill comes in because you want to get through to the other side, and by drilling it, you're accomplishing first a couple of things. First, you're getting through to the other side, which is always a good feeling, but you can go in now and use these saw blades, and it's not as rough on the saw because it's not a solid chunk of stone. You got air spots in there, so it keeps the tool working a little easier to get through there. So by hook or by crook, you're going to get through there with any tool you got. You know, you might start with this, then go by that, and then try this, and then start all over again as far as working your way through. But once I got through there, I was feeling pretty good. I'm starting to draw stuff on here now. The handle, going to start tightening that up. This is starting to get all cleaned up down here. When you're working in the round, again, you got to check all sides. But so far, we're looking pretty good. I was feeling pretty good at this point, going at it from that side. And I've probably even taken more down now, as you can see. The hair's in there, starting to come up with a hairline. Sleeve. Looks like I got the things in the bellow, starting to shape those out. And the closer you get, the more you draw on there. This arm, now I'm going to start tightening that up. I'm going to start putting in the eyes, you know, pushing that stuff back, cut in a mustache. Start shaping the bellow a little bit more. And here now, the eyes are cut in. The mouth is starting to happen. I'm thinking about the belt over here. I didn't get to that yet, but I'm getting there. Now we'll start putting in the ears. You can see the sleeve more prominent. Here, the hand's going there, this hand's over there. The feet are down here. Probably taking a little bit of that in, and it's rounding out, and we're getting closer to the ears. Got to do two sides, so. I might have been drawing something here just to figure out the belt. I don't know what that's all about, but here's the other side of the belt there. There's the hair on that side. And now things are starting to take shape. As you can see, I'm cleaning it up. The toes are coming in. The belt's in there. Starting to put in the hair. The bellow's closer. I cut that part on the bellow now. Looking at it from the front, I started drawing in a design that I'll put on there. I put in a Nordic knot. A little cleft underneath the nose. The mouth, I can see that's all penciled in. It's getting tighter again. Starting to take more shape. Things are becoming more defined. I opened the eyes here, cut this in, started putting in the fingers. The toes are all taking shape. Cleaning that up. Eyebrows, open. Fingers. And I think this is where I polished it, called it done and polished it. Oh, so that other thing that I drew there was probably this part right here. Now that I'm looking at it. So that's where the dwarfs came from. That's 4 of the dwarfs I got from Adrian on that batch of stones. The other 3 dwarfs, since I'm in the tombstone business, you know people. And one day I was driving to work and I saw in this one dealer's yard this marble base. And marble really doesn't stand up well outside over here. So I knew she was going to die with this marble base in her driveway. So I pulled in and I asked her if she'd want to sell it. And she was on it because she'd have to pay to have it hauled away. So she goes, make me a price. I made her a price. She accepted it, no problem. And then I had my friend Joe Kowalski pick it up and bring it over to my shop and had it over there for a while. But I seen that I could go from 4 dwarfs to do a series of the 7 other dwarfs, because saw it in 3 parts. I'd have 3 pieces of marble that were just about the right size and another little 6-inch piece for something else in the future. So that's where the marble for the dwarfs came from and what enabled me to do the whole series, 7 Other Dwarfs. Now the things. As a young kid, when the Addams Family came out, I'd have to say I was pretty impressed with all of that. Like most kids probably were. And I mean, you didn't have to be a kid. I think teenagers and adults were into that show also. So these stones, one day on Facebook, I got a message. Ted, are you interested in any of my stones? I said, okay, Jim, when you say, am I interested in any of your stones, are you talking about, do I want to buy them or are they for free? He goes, they're for free. I said, okay. Can I pick and choose, or do I have to clear out your garage? Because now I already got a lot of stones in my garage, And he said, you can pick and choose. I said, okay, what's your address? Now, what do you give a guy that doesn't want money, for these stones? I mean, he's got to get rid of it. I went down and grabbed a bottle of mead, my homemade mead, which, again, was influenced by my trip to Denmark. That was another thing that I brought home as far as that went. And I gave him the bottle, he took it, and I think in a matter of 2 or 3 days later, he said, Ted, how do you make this stuff? I think I found my next hobby. So he came over and I showed him the steps for that. So I did one thing with the slingshot. Now, it wasn't quite the thing yet, but it was a hand holding a slingshot. And again, this is a case where now you're looking at what you got. And I said, well, I could do a series of these hands. And they remind me of thing from, so that's how things outside the box came to being. This was the very last thing that I did. And I wanted to have him holding a pipe, a smoking pipe. And I didn't know how it was going to fit. So you can see like the pencil marks up there where I kind of sketched it in. And that came from looking at my hand holding the pipe. I drew it on there. And it's going to work. It might be a little strange, but it's going to work, no problem. So I started sketching on it. I got a little bit ahead of myself here, but you can see it drawn on the side there. Here I got it drawn on the two sides. And again, like I said, I got a little ahead of myself. I'll show you in the next picture. But I used my saw and took these parts out. Here's where I started making it a little bit smaller. Went in there, just take this out, and then take that out, take my handset and knock those pieces off. Now I'm starting to fit the pipe in, drawing a little more, trying to figure out the thumb. But I got a nice fit, so I'm happy. We're well on our way. So the saw, it's good for drawing in the fingers. I can just use that, separate them. And I didn't use the pneumatic hammer a lot on this sculpture because it's soft, but I did use it with that chisel that Bob showed me, where I ground it down to draw these fingers in, and then I might have used another one to dig that out a little bit. But we're going to town. Now I'm starting to push in. Still got a nice fit because I'm checking it all the time. Getting a little bit closer, the finger, if you go back, that one finger's like coming out a little bit. These are rounded. You always feel like you're getting a little more done when you start putting in fingers and things like fingernails and the wrinkles in the fingers. And so now we're getting close. Pipe's still fitting good. I'm fine with everything. Again, we're working in the round, so you want to do a little bit of that stuff in the back of the hand right there. The base. I love the way wood and stone go together. I mean, it's like peanut butter and jelly. They just go together so good. It's really a look that I like. So now, let me see if you can see right here, I got it on a piece of wood. And what I got there is I already put the pins in here, but in order to know where the pins are going to go on this and on the base, that's drilled all the way through. So I found a spot where I can put this, set it up, and we got shelves in the back there that you can see. And they got holes in them. So I was able to put that on there, set that there, hold that up, and I could go in with a pencil underneath there and mark the two spots on the stone where I'm going to drill these holes. And from there, I took a tube of acrylic paint and I put a little dab of green on each of the pencil marks, and then I set that down on the base. So now I know where I'm going to drill on the stone and into the wood for the base so everything lines up. Looks good on paper, but it works pretty good. So there's that. And here we are after I polished it. Set it on there, mounted it, and I was happy how that came out. So now I'll take a few questions, but I do want to tell one more story before I'm all finished. Does anybody have any questions?
What do you do if you've gone too far?
I'll tell you what I did when I went too far on Bob's sculpture, you know, with the farmers there, because, you know, he was away and I was working. He just said, not a problem, we'll make that a wrinkle in her dress. So that was his solution to that. I try not to go too far, obviously. You know, I'm going to go a little bit and look at it, and even if I got to stop there for a bit and go a little bit further in this and just kind of call it as I go, is what I do there. Yes?
So did you, when you started doing human figures, did you spend some time like looking at human anatomy and photographs and?
About as far as I ever got on that was over at Dominican University over there. They would have a life drawing class. And I was not a class even, it was like an open session where you could go in, pay a fee, and, you know, draw the model. So that's about as far as I ever went with that there.
So you got the balance, like this much space for the head and the shoulder?
That, and me and my eraser are like this.
Okay.
You know, so just being honest with you, yeah. So I mean, you know, I rely on my eraser a lot. Yes?
How long did it take you to do that?
One of those common questions. I'll tell you what, when I got the email from Dorothy, and this was probably in February, possibly? No, not February. Maybe it was February, you know, about participating in the show. I told her I got one more sculpture I'd like to get done in this series of things. So, you know, with everything considered, and I don't go out and work in the winter time. It's too cold for me to go outside, and I don't do that. So I had to wait until March, really, before I do that. In the winter, I sit down, go down to the basement, and I'll oil paint.
Do you work on multiple projects?
No, I can't think like that. I can't think like that. One at a time for me. So I got this done. Getting pretty close from March, you know, and all the other things that I got going and the weather and what have you. I got it done in time, so I hurried up and messaged them that I'm going to have the 7th thing ready for the show. So in this case, you know, a couple months, but that's not really working straight through 8 hours or anything on it. You know, I'll decide how far I want to get in a day or a couple hours where I'm working on it and do that and call it quits.
What does mead taste like? Is it
Oh, that's a honey wine. That's a whole other subject, you know. Yes.
anything like beer?
It's more like wine.
Oh, okay.
What was the country of origin, the big piece of marble that was in the driveway? Where did it come from originally?
Oh, that was Berry granite out of Berry, Vermont. Probably some of the best stuff you can use as far as granites go.
On that blade that you use to cut it, is that a diamond tip?
It's got industrial diamonds all around it, yes. I like to do still lifes.
About the polishing part, is it just like polishing card? Do you have like soft cloth or white?
Sandpapers from Ace Hardware, different grades,
Okay.
dry and wet, you know, and then at the very end, tin oxide and a little bit of burlap, take it down. Yeah, Nick.
Type of stone that you prefer to use?
No, I don't have a favorite. I like limestone. I like marble. These are good. I guess I have favorites at different times. And like when I went back and did a limestone piece one time, I was like, oh, I forgot how nice this really is to carve. I do want to save one time for one more story and close this out because it's almost time for the reception. When I met my wife, one of the things she told me about was the talent show that her family has. And yeah, his 6 brothers, 3 sisters, countless numbers of nephews and grandchildren and what have you there. So they usually do this at Christmas time. I've heard the Wreck of the Hesperus, Gunga Din, Buzzsaw. I've heard songs sung in opera style, songs sung in French, you name it. Movie star imitations. And my weak Simpson imitation didn't really cut it for this. So I went down to the basement where I oil paint and put pen to the paper. So now I was ready when my name got called. So when they called my name, I went to the center of the room, looked at the crowd just like I'm looking at you guys right now, and this is what I said. If it's a poem you must hear, you shall look no farther than the words of the stone carver. As he walked into the room alone, it was to engage in some intimate act with the stone. Like the mystery of some unknown sin, what unseen sight lies within. He circles to the left and he circles to the right. He'll find something in there if it takes him all night. But he needs an idea, and he needs it fast. There's only one place to look, and it's to the past. Oldafar, can you help me through? Tip, tip, Oldafar, I need you too. And to his surprise, he got Superman eyes, and in his head, the voices said, go ahead and start to create your art. What else could he say but okay? Ding, 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 the hammer hit the chisel. He steps back, and his hopes begin to fizzle. I'll rise to this challenge of an artistic duel. I'll use this, the big air tool. Hammering away, he's in the zone. Slowly, the revealing figure shown. Chips flying here, chips flying there. Chips must fly for the sculptor to get anywhere. With a little finesse, he roughs in a breast, and without any trouble, he made it a double. As he tackles this subject that's harder than bone, soon it releases its secrets to be sown. Man against nature in a form of fight, bringing the virgin stone into the light. He knows that poet, painter, artisans in glass, when it comes to this medium, most all will take a pass. He finishes the carving and he sweeps up the dust and he said to himself, Ted, you carved a mighty fine bust. I want to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who came out. It's been a pleasure.